Hello, it's time for the first wrap up of my August reading. Disclaimer, every book here was 4 stars or more, so it's going a lot better than September did already. I'm going to get straight into it and start with the first book I read this month, which was The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. This was a 4-star read for me. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. It didn't blow me away. It certainly wasn't one of the best books of the year, but it was okay. It was average. This is about a stay-at-home father called Alex. It's written from his point of view, and it's about one of his daughters, Miriam's, it's kind of a cardiac incident at school, which results in her randomly just stopping breathing and dying effectively. She then comes round, and for most of the book she's in hospital, and they're sort of trying to deal with the fact that this just happened out of the blue, and sort of Alex develops all these fears about the things that can happen to you and the sort of immortality and the delicateness of life, basically, and all the health issues that he's now suddenly aware of. And he's got another daughter, a younger daughter, who he also starts having fears for, and he sort of feels as though he can't leave her or anything in case something happens to her as well. This was okay. I think the reasons for me that I didn't like it are possibly intentional, but for me I felt like because it's first person from Alex's point of view, it's very narrow, and it kind of was almost a bit selfish. I didn't like his voice. I found it quite grating and irritating because it's his daughter that this has happened to, and yet at no point really do we find out how she feels about it. It's all about how he feels about it and how he now feels like he has to worry, and he doesn't really consider her as a person. She's not a fully fleshed out character. I felt as though he was looking at it completely from how this makes me feel. And he's a father, I think he wouldn't do that. He would completely be worried about her for her sake, not about for how he would deal with it if something happened to her. So in that sense, it kind of grated on me. I also found that it was very sort of claustrophobic, because we're only in his point of view. And I think the claustrophobia was kind of intentional because it kind of brings across how he's feeling, but it got quite annoying. And also, this is a 330 odd page novel, and it literally just deals with the fact that he now feels like he can't leave his daughters and things like that, and it kind of went on and on. It could have been a lot shorter or had a little bit more to it for me, but it was okay, and I enjoyed the writing. For me, I wouldn't say Sarah Moss is quite there yet, but I certainly will be looking out for her because I think she's a writer to look out for, and potentially she could be really good, so I will be picking up anything else she writes. But it was a little bit disappointing for me. But again, this was actually what incited me to do my reading expectations video, which I will link down below, about the fact that because it was so hyped up, I was expecting a lot more from it, and would it have been an okay read if I hadn't expected that from it? But also, I think it actually would have been a bit of a more forgettable read if there wasn't so much hype about it, because it didn't blow me away. So it's a hard one, but yeah, it was okay. Then I picked up Toni Morrison's Beloved. This was a 5-star blatantly. This is my first Toni Morrison, and I adored it. I feel as though it's going to be a hard one to review because I went into this not knowing anything about it. Basically, all I'm going to tell you is that this is about a black woman in America called Seb, who we know that her daughter has died, and that on the gravestone was simply written Beloved. And a woman turns up at her house, and things go from there. It's a bit supernatural, so actually it was quite appropriate for October. I didn't know that going into it. But the writing in this is just phenomenal. Now, I'm going to read you a bit. This is just a tiny little bit. I could have read you so many things, but this is a tiny little bit that shows you how spectacular the writing is. Paul D had only begun. What he was telling her was only the beginning, when her fingers on his knee, soft and reassuring, stopped him. Just as well. Just as well. Saying more might push them both to a place they couldn't get back from. He would keep the rest where it belonged, in that tobacco tin buried in his chest where a red heart used to be, its lid rusted shut. He would not pry it loose now in front of this sweet, sturdy woman, for if she got a whiff of the contents it would shame him, and it would hurt her to know that there was no red heart bright as Mister's comb beating in him. Like, that is the metaphor she comes back to often, actually, with that character, that he's got a tobacco tin instead of a heart, and it's really touching, and it's just beautifully written. Like, this is the writing that I've been after. It's amazing. I would definitely recommend anyone who hasn't read Toni Morrison to do so. Because of the time it's written in, it looks at issues of race in America and the way that black people were literally treated as though they were commodities to be bought, It looks at some of the shocking things that were done to her and to Paul D as well. They all come from this sort of plantation where they were basically just bought and used. And it's shocking, it's amazing, it's spectacularly written. I would just, all the recommendation. Then I read a short story anthology, which was Life, which was stories by women collected from Victoria Hislop that sort of look at different aspects of life, death, and everything else like that. I took a while to get into this. The first sort of quarter, all the stories were quite mediocre, which I was disappointed in. There was a story from Margaret Atwood that I was really looking forward to reading, but it didn't blow me away. But then I got into it, and the next 3 quarters were absolutely amazing. I love short story anthologies. I knew that there were stories in here by Ali Smith, there were stories by Margaret Atwood, there was a story by Hilary Mantel, so I knew there were writers in here that I loved. But what surprises me with anthologies is that you find writers that you wouldn't normally come across that absolutely blow you away. One person who surprised me was A.M. Holmes has got some stories in here. Firstly, I didn't know she was a woman. Secondly, I've read her books and didn't actually love them at all. But there's a short story in here called The Real Doll, which is kind of magical realism about a boy who goes into his sister's room and ends up falling in love with her Barbie, and her Barbie speaks to him and things, and they end up having a sexual relationship, and it all gets a bit strange. It was hilarious and so well done. So well done. The story in here by Ali Smith was about a child who ends up getting put in her trolley in a supermarket, and she doesn't know where he's come from, and he sort of speaks to her, and some social issues are discussed, and it's all a bit freaky, and it was just really good. There were some fantastic stories in here. I've highlighted quite a few. I really enjoyed the experience, and I think it's a lot of fun going into it and not knowing what story you're going to come across next. Some weren't amazing, some were really not great, but some of them were spectacular, and I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for A.M. Holmes from now on. Then I did a reread, which was The Lover's Dictionary by David Leviathan. I actually read this earlier in the year, but it's a really short little book and not much writing to a page. It's basically done in a dictionary format where we are looking at a relationship and the breakdown of a relationship in definitions. So each word has like a scenario of what happened in their relationship or what he feels about his woman. We learn quite early on that she's cheated on him, and he's trying to deal with that, and he's looking back at their relationship and sort of trying to understand how he can move forward, and it's really quite sweet. I will read you one of the definitions. This is the definition for abstraction. Love is one kind of abstraction. And then there are those nights when I sleep alone, when I curl into a pillow that isn't you, when I hear the tiptoe sounds that aren't yours. It's not as if I can conjure you there completely. I must embrace the idea of you instead. I think I actually read that one out before when I read it. I wanted to reread this just for a little quick read, and also because it's really beautifully written and really enjoyable, and I wanted to revisit it. And finally, I finished this half of the month on The Passion by Jeanette Winterson. This was a 5-star read for me. Now, story-wise, plot-wise, it was a 4-star, but the writing in this is absolutely phenomenal. I had to give it 5 stars. Also, I think the time in my life that I read it was just spot on, and everything in there was just like, this is me. How do you know? Like, it's amazing. Jeanette Winterson and the things she can do with language absolutely just astound me. She is a phenomenal woman, and I will be going to see her at the end of November, so I'm very excited. But this is basically, it's hard to explain. It follows 2 people. So it follows Henri, who is a Frenchman who is obsessed with Napoleon Bonaparte. He is working in Napoleon Bonaparte's sort of circle, I suppose. He's his chicken man. And he is absolutely obsessed with this idea of Napoleon. And it sort of follows him through Napoleon's downfall. And he sort of realises that his love might have blinded him to a few things. And so it's interesting in that way. We also follow a woman living in Venice called Villanelle, who has been born, she was the daughter of a boatman, and she's been born with webbed feet, and she sort of is a trickster, and she dresses as a man and sort of gambles with like the higher society, and she ends up falling in love with women, and we follow her as well. They come together and something happens that sort of ties them together. Basically, this just looks at passion in different forms, love in different forms. It looks at unfulfilled love, it looks at passionate love, it looks at delusional love, it looks at love from a distance. It is spectacular. The best way I can describe it, as always, is to read you a part. So, lovers are not at their best when it matters. Mouths dry up, palms sweat, conversation flags, and all the time the heart is threatening to fly from the body once and for all. Lovers have been known to have heart attacks. Lovers drink too much from nervousness and cannot perform. They eat too little and faint during their fervishly wished consummation. They do not stroke the favoured cat, and their face paint comes loose. This is not all. Whatever you were set store by, your dress, your dinner, your poetry, will go wrong. Like, just says it all. I would definitely recommend this. Definitely recommend this. So that's everything. So things are on the up, and I've read some really good books, and I'm hoping this will continue throughout the rest of the month. What have everyone else been reading? Have you had any excellent books? I know a lot of people had a bad reading September. It seemed to be a bit of a cursed month. So hopefully everyone's reading is going better, and I will see you next time. Bye!